2, 1. We are on. Welcome, everyone. Intelligent Disclosure. I'm Richard Dolan with my wife, Tracey.
Hi, everybody.
Happy to be here with you. We were happily away for a short while. We didn't do a couple of episodes lately, did we? I don't think we did.
We couldn't.
We couldn't. We were away, but we're back, and we're happy to be here back with you. So, got a really, I think, a very interesting show for you tonight. Show, program, whatever we call it, program, on a topic that the more we dug into this, the more fascinating it became. But we have two quick little shorter things that we wanted to discuss first. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what's so different about these days, right? You can just go and say, hey, what's in the news with UFOs? And there's something, there's
Right.
always something. Whereas before there was nothing ever. You couldn't go to the news and find something actually interesting. So,
not much, I guess I would say. Right.
Well, not
Right,
much. I mean, it was sparse, right?
Right.
And so I did this right before the show, and I found this article. Americans overwhelmingly want UFO X-Files to be made public. Of course, this is on the heels of the UK announcing that they're going to make their files public.
Yet again, they've been saying this for years.
I know.
And making
And
announcements.
maybe it will
and whatever.
never happen. I don't know.
Well,
but this company called People Say did a poll of 30,741 Americans.
Should I
And
share the screen
yeah,
here?
let's put the screen up because this is from their website.
Yeah.
And they've got a large infographic if you're interested in any of the other statistics that they have here. But here's just something of interest. Yeah, 61% of Americans want U.S. files declassified. I mean, that's a significant number.
Right.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So are they excited about the UK's decision to declassify its UFO reports? Whether that happens or not, how are people feeling about this? And 30,000 is a big sample size. So 50% say finally, there'll be information. 34% no, it'll create unnecessary madness. 16% don't care.
Well, I'm assuming that it will create unnecessary madness was prompted by the people doing the poll. But okay.
Yeah, we don't know
way.
the questions. I mean, if we really wanted
Right.
to, it'd be great to look into
Right.
the questions they were asking. But a couple other statistics here. 58% of Americans think the government continues to investigate alien life.
Mm-hmm.
And 27% of Americans think that UFO sightings are real.
What was that last percentage?
27
Think that UFO sightings are real. Only 27?
I know. That's what I said.
But 57% think that the U.S.
That the government
investigates.
continues to investigate alien life.
Okay.
So it's one of those surveys that you really, I mean, if we had the time, we should
You really need to dive into that.
Yeah,
one,
right. You could really dive in and see what they're doing, but they do have a really large sample size. And so, what they said, what they came up with is kind of interesting. How they phrased the questions would be really great to know.
Okay.
But this was just something that was sitting in the news.
I think we want to do a deeper dive into that at some point.
I think so.
As we want to do for this next subject.
That's right.
Want to hit the next slide?
I think we all know about this one.
Yeah, this is the Popular Mechanics article, and we were both looking into this. You want to have a thing to say about this?
This is Tim McMillan. He released this on Valentine's Day, actually, right?
A few days ago.
And, he's been doing some interviews, and it's a big article, and there's a lot of information in there. But ultimately, what it's saying is the Pentagon, the government has been
investigating UFOs.
Yes, and they still are. It absolutely is something that is ongoing and still exists.
We're going to do a deeper dive into this in the near future, I'm sure. But the other thing he said, though, was also that Lou Elizondo was truthful.
That's right.
Like, surprise. Honestly, I just, and I don't want to take anything away from McMillan's research. This is a very long article, and he did a lot of work in it. He was able to have access to a substantially large document.
Yeah, 10 months
from the program, which is not available. Primarily, it's not available yet. But I mean, to me, looking at Elizondo all this time and the whole controversy over the last year, was he a member of ATIP or not? And a a lot of people were really willing to jump on Elizondo and say, aha, he was lying. He's not part of ATIP because one Pentagon spokesperson, was denying it. And clearly, I've just been saying this all along. I think what you see within the Pentagon is a battle. It's a turf war. And you've got those people who supported and have supported those efforts to have a little more openness about UFOs, UAP, and those who are just, no, absolutely not. And like, how dare he get those videos released on the sly, and go around us and all of it. So I think you're really seeing a lot of back and forth going on. That's been my take all along.
Well, it's kind of nice to see this cleared up. Finally.
For now, until the next one comes out.
I'm sure there'll be more, but it was hard to imagine why he would go on the show and go on so many stages publicly if he was lying about, what he was involved in.
Yeah.
But we've all been through this a million times.
And
it's just nice to see it cleared up for the most part.
The article by Tim McMillan is very long. It's very detailed. Please do check it out. And I think, we will come back to this.
Yeah. I think so.
So, okay, there we go. Now we have our main quarry for the night.
That's right.
So this actually leads us into the TTSA thing anyway. And did you want to say anything about this by introduction, or shall I jump in, or what?
I think one really kind of interesting place to start is to look at UFO sightings versus crash retrievals.
Oh, yes.
And why crash retrievals would be so much, or why it would be so important versus UFO sightings. So,
yeah, it's critical. I mean, this issue has been with us, crash retrievals, yes or no, for decades now. And actually we all know about the Roswell story, but Roswell, of course, was pulled 3 hours after the story was released in 1947. And then for like 30 years, no one was really talking about crash retrievals, basically, until the 1970s. And then at that time, these stories began coming out. Just the other day, I did a whole thing on the Kingman UFO crash, mainly for our website, but also I talked a little bit about it on my live stream just the other day. That actually came out in the early 70s, earlier than Roswell. And then in the late 70s, the Roswell story. So now we talk about it. But here's the thing about crash retrievals. When you acknowledge that the UFO phenomenon involves retrievals, physical retrievals of someone's technology, right? That takes it to a totally different level. It's no longer possible for government or military people to say, well, there's something out there, but we don't know what it is. I'm like, no, sorry, you know what it is because you got their stuff. You may not know everything about them, but if you've got the tech, that means you're studying the tech. If you've got bodies, you're studying the bodies, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so, crash retrievals of these objects is extremely important, not simply from a ufology point of view, but from a public discourse point of view. Like the public, we're getting this new understanding through the mainstream corporate establishment media that UFOs are okay to talk about now, that maybe they're real after all. Like, wow, that's a really significant thing. No question about it. Now let's go to the next logical step here. And here's the thing that really gets me going. You look at an organization like TTSA, so Tom DeLonge, Hal Puthoff, Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, Jim Semivan, Steve Justice, and all of these other individuals involved. They're very impressive, right? They've got impressive backgrounds, largely with the intelligence community, science. And what you find for many of them, not all of them, and their allies, like close people associated with them, are these astonishingly candid statements about the recovery of crashed or landed UFOs or UAP. Like it just comes up again and again.
But it's kind of peppered all over the place. So no one really pulls them together to sort of have a look at.
That's the thing.
What have they all said? What do we have here all together? So I love that you're going to tackle that?
Well, they paint a picture. That's really what it is. And so it's not everyone in TTS. Like I was looking for statements by Chris Mellon, who, I mean, he's very articulate, extremely knowledgeable man. And he talks very, very at length about the inexplicable airspace violations by these incredible objects. He does it very well. I haven't seen crash retrieval statements from him. I think he's been very measured about it, but other individuals in the organization, particularly Hal Puthoff, with whom I corresponded today, I will talk about that. Yeah.
Chris Mellon is in, I think, quite, not extensively, but almost in James Fox's new movie that's coming out. It's not out yet. Phenomenon. Yeah.
That's right.
So we'd have to look at what he says in that as well. I think.
Well,
I don't know.
You and I have.
We've seen it, but we weren't hunting for this particular thing. So
no, Mellon actually was one of the stars of that, in my opinion. He did really a good job, but you'll have to wait until that's released later this year. Sorry. But my point is, with TTSA, you've got Hal Puthoff, and then someone very close to Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis. He's not officially in TTSA, but I would say he's realistically an honorary member. He knows all the folks in there. He's had some I'm going to talk about all of this. So I think, how about I share the screen?
Yeah.
And we just jump right in. We're going to start with Robert Bigelow, who, again, he's not TTSA officially either. But for anyone who's been following that organization, Robert Bigelow he's the big guy. He's the one with all the money he has put into studying the UFO and related phenomenon for decades. He's an incredibly knowledgeable man. This is Bigelow during his interview in 2017 with 60 Minutes. And he was not talking explicitly about crash retrievals of UFOs. He was not. However, he was saying, this is real and they're not from here. And this is one of the main quotes he had. There has been and is an existing presence, an ET presence. And I spent millions and millions and millions. I probably spent more as an individual than anybody else in the United States has ever spent on this subject. That's probably true on an individual basis. Bob Bigelow.
I just want to add something else from that same interview,
right?
Because it was so good. You know, Lara Logan, the person who was interviewing him,
yes,
said, "Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?" And Robert Bigelow says, "We don't have to go anywhere."
Right, exactly.
She said, "You can find it here." Where exactly? And he says, "It's just right under people's noses." Oh my gosh! Wow.
And it's a significant thing for him to say this.
It is. In
connection even with TTSA, because again, no, he's not a formal member of that organization. We understand that, but it's very likely that group really couldn't have had any forward motion without Robert Bigelow. Mm-hmm. He, of course, was the military contractor under the ATIP program, his company BASS, which I think really in a lot of ways you could see as the germ of what then later became TTSA. Mm-hmm. So I think it's significant that he has that opinion, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I just loved it how he just said, he didn't care. He just didn't care what people thought. They're here, and that's that. Right. And don't you wish he could just say whatever he wanted?
Well, he's getting pretty darn close to it. I mean, there's things that...
Yeah, but I mean, there's so much.
Well, that leads us to this man. Now, I've known Hal Puthoff for about 20 years, and just let me put this right out there. I've known him, and I respect him, and I like him personally. He has been gracious with me over a long period of time to answer my many questions. I often feel like I pester this guy, mostly through emails. And the thing is, like, Hal will answer what he can or what he wants to, and he doesn't mince words. He doesn't waste words either. And I had a correspondence with him today, which I will be able here to discuss. But this man, who is really one of the key members of TTSA, has had a lot to say about not just UFOs over the years, but indeed, I don't want to misquote him directly, and he would never say that he has acknowledged crash retrievals of UFOs openly. Mm-hmm. But when you look at what he has said publicly, he has all but said that, and has absolutely implicitly stated this many times. And I want to go over a few of the statements that he has made kind of in order in recent times. So this was shortly after TTSA formed. This is like a month and a half after the New York Times and Politico made their announcement about the ATIP program, and kind of the world got turned upside down in ufology. And Hal Puthoff was on Coast to Coast AM with George Knapp.
Mm-hmm.
Now those guys, they know each other very, very well. And so this is from January 28th. And the segment of this that I'm going to go over is on YouTube. Maybe the whole interview is on YouTube, but this segment definitely is. And I would encourage people to go listen to it. But I've got it right here, and I'm just going to read it. I want people to hear this. So George Knapp says, one of the most intriguing sentences in the New York Times report mentioned an exotic material of unknown origin that was at Bigelow Aerospace for a while. Is that from a crash? Do you think crashes have happened? So George is just like, he kind of jumped right out there. And Hal really took a lot of time. There's a long pause before he answered this. And then he, very true to form, he's very meticulous here. He says, detailed proof that crashes had happened would be a so highly classified piece of data. There has been one leaked document. There has been one leaked document. How it leaked, I'll never know, which is out there, that talks about some crashes that we were able to verify it was a real document. That's very interesting, obviously, and people have been speculating ever since what that document is. I have my thoughts, but I'm not yet going to share them. He goes on, though. He says, my opinion is that there are probably at least materials. Now, keep in mind, when Hal Puthoff says anything like this, he is extremely careful, and he knows exactly how to protect himself. He knows the rules CYA better than anyone that I've ever met. He says, now it wouldn't necessarily have to be a crash of an entire craft, but it could be a piece blown off, whatever, by a lightning strike or a missile or whatever. So I'm not surprised, he says, to find out that there is discussion of material being available. No, I'm sure he's not surprised. He says, we've had an opportunity to look at some unusual material, and I think that is a big area that will become more significant as time goes on. This, I think, is the first mention that I'm aware of by him of what became known as the metamaterial. So at this point, George Knapp just says, you're killing me, Hal. You had a chance to look at some material. That's a really significant statement to make. So Puthoff says, I did. And the interesting thing about it was that I couldn't figure out a very complex material. When you talk to people that are doing this kind of research, we know about all the elements on the periodic table, so you're not finding some new element that you didn't realize is on the periodic table. No, he said, it's more like putting together layers of various kinds of materials that you wouldn't expect to be layered. So that's from January 28, 2018. He goes on 6 months later. Oh, let me read the last part of this. So sorry. And then he says, and the result at the end of the day is that it has certain unusual characteristics that you wouldn't have predicted in advance. So that is the kind of thing that to a physicist is the most interesting. So that's the key takeaway from his George Knapp interview. A few months later, Hal Puthoff was speaking at the Society of Scientific Exploration, SSE, and he's talking quite a lot about that material, actually. And this particular quote isn't even necessarily the best, but he just says, I'll give you an example of how this stuff helps people who are chasing these really difficult problems. I'm choosing one here, metamaterials for aerospace use. I'd love to talk about really fancy materials, but they're classified. However, there's a lot of materials that have been picked up or provided even in the public domain. And then he talks about this one piece that came to Art Bell in the 90s. Linda Moulton Howe held it for many, many years. Hal's office, among others, studied it. And he talks about essentially, here, I'll unshare this for the moment, how he and his lab looked into this. And the problem was they couldn't figure out how this could have been made. Right. And they still can't. They couldn't understand, this is back in the 90s, how or who could have made it much less what it was for. And what he basically said is that over time, science began to catch up to this artifact, which was allegedly from a crash UFO, by the way. I guess we should say that. And he talks quite a lot about that. We have talked about this before. I've talked about it. So there's no need to go into all of the details, except what you really get with that statement, in my view, and a lot of people's view about what Hal Puthoff was doing, is he's saying, I'm not saying it's extraterrestrial, but it's extraterrestrial. Like, I'm not saying, because what he was really saying is we have no idea how this could have been manufactured or who could have done it. And he later described it in that same lecture as an outstanding waveguide for high frequency terahertz electromagnetic radiation. And that gets into some very interesting science that you're really starting to deal with principles of softening, as Jack Sarfati puts it, the space-time boundary around the craft, if that's what it is, and essentially playing games with space and time. And now you're really getting into some pretty fringe, let's say cutting edge science. I don't want to say fringe. So that's an important statement, and that's one of the key people in TTSA making a very, very strong statement about a crash retrieval of a UAP without explicitly saying so. Fast forward a year. The famous or infamous to some people Wilson document, the leaked document, authored, I have maintained since day one, by Dr. Eric Davis, comes out. It's leaked. Finally comes out in June of 2019. Makes the rounds, along with another document. On these these came from the files of the late Edgar Mitchell, who's also part of this crowd. Edgar Mitchell was part of the Robert Bigelow crowd. He was a member of the NIDS board, along with Hal Puthoff, along with Kit Green, along with Eric Davis and Colm Kelleher. Mitchell died. Some of his papers got out, including the whole thread that they had on the so-called alien autopsy thing, which we've talked about from 2001, but that was that thread. That was one thing. And then the other, I think, more important document is the Thomas Wilson notes by Eric Davis after Davis met with Wilson. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we've got videos on the channel. I've got articles on our website. People have talked about it. Essentially, you have a meeting in which you essentially get a confirmation that there were crash retrievals of UAP and an attempt in the deep black budget privatized world to reverse engineer and try to figure this out. All right. So this comes out, and I immediately communicated with Hal Puthoff about this. Like, I mean, immediately. And I said, so, hey, what do you want to say about this now that it's out? And he was very gracious. And this is a statement he gave me at the time on June 12th. He said, look, with regard to authenticity, we have no comment on the documents recently being circulated. We, that's him, that's Eric Davis, that's presumably everyone in the crowd. As some of us still retain U.S. government security clearances and remain bound by the secrecy oaths we have taken, we believe it is in the best interest of the United States government and ourselves not to comment on any documents that purport to describe classified U.S. government programs or information. Very legalistically worded. I appreciate it. And what I mainly appreciate about it was this was the best no comment that I've ever gotten from anyone on anything.
Didn't Kit Green give you a pretty good no comment as well?
Kit Green's, I didn't include it here, but his was off the charts. It was amazing. He actually, when I spoke to Kit Green about it, so there's certain things I'm not at liberty to discuss here. He gave me an official statement, and then he gave me an unofficial off-the-record statement. So his official statement was, despite the fact that I've seen it, despite the fact that I have opinions about it, I'm not in a position to offer any opinion on it because I can't speak officially to its provenance. I can't say anything about it, so I won't say anything about that. And then we had basically a 30-minute off-the-record conversation about it, which at the end of that, I said, look, can I tell people that we had an on-the-record and an off-the-record? And he had a little bit of a hesitation. He said, yes, you can. So that,
Just tell them that you had it, not. Yeah.
that we had it, that we had a very extensive off the
Mhm.
record. Yeah. So this whole thing with Hal Puthoff and the Wilson document came up just a week ago, just 1 week ago. He was speaking just on February 8th in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. It was a very interesting lecture that he gave. This made the rounds immediately. Someone sent me the audio of it right away. I'm very grateful for that. So I was able to listen to it. So he gave a lecture, which was interesting. But what was really interesting is that there were like 25 or more questions that were asked of him
Mhm.
at the end of the lecture. I can't remember the exact number. It was a lot. I think it was more than 25. And you can imagine having that many questions from an audience. So one of them toward the end, and this is verbatim, folks, because I just made a very careful transcription myself from the audio this morning. I want to make sure I got it exactly right. So this question was, the individual mentioned me by name and said, Richard Dolan calls the Wilson documents, the Wilson document leak, the leak of the century. Can I get a comment on the Wilson document? So that was the exact verbatim of the question. And this is the exact verbatim of Hal Puthoff's statement. He says, now the audio was bad, so he was in the habit of repeating the questions.
Mhm.
So he says, this is a question about the Wilson documents. They probably got leaked on the internet. Admiral Wilson was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff interviewed by my senior colleague, Eric Davis. Since it discusses potentially ongoing programs, I have no comment. Now, when you listen to the audio, like people in the audience were affected by that to some extent. Like you can hear gasps from some people in the audience and one person saying, oh, wow, very quietly, because, but that happened. Now, so for the last week, people have been saying, has Puthoff authenticated the Wilson meeting with Eric Davis? And I absolutely was of the opinion and am of the opinion that the answer to that is yes, he has done it. I think many other people have concluded the same thing. But I want to do this for Hal Puthoff. I owe him this. I corresponded with him about this yesterday and today. And he is stating on the record that that was not his intention to authenticate that
Mhm.
meeting or the document.
Mhm.
And his statement to me was that, he was trying to rephrase the questions. And he said to me, well, I clearly didn't do a very good job of it in this case. And he said, I can understand why people would think that I was endorsing the meeting and the document, but that's not what I'm doing. So that was exactly, that was what he said to me. Now, with respect, I'm just going to say that I do not share that opinion. I don't think I think all that people really need to do is read the question and read what he said. And you could say it's entirely possible that maybe he didn't mean that, but that's not how I read it. I think everyone has a moment where they're off guard,
Mhm.
and that's my opinion, but it is not his opinion. So people do really need to understand that. I'm just glad that we mention it because I have a feeling these issues, they're not going to go away. So I think that's for sure. Now, that's the wrong direction.
I
So
just saw someone wrote.
I'll come back to Eric Davis in a second here.
Someone was asking, who does Puthoff report to? Do we know that?
Well, he has his own company, Earth Tech, which is
Yeah.
his. He's, had security
Sort of a free
clearances.
contractor?
Yes and no. I mean, we should ask him this. If he'll ever do an interview with me publicly, that would be great. I'm not sure he'll submit to that, but
That'd be nice.
He's got security clearances. And one thing that I think is very obvious, not just with him, but the entire circle of people here, is they take their security oaths very seriously.
Mhm.
They say what they're legally allowed to say, and not a step further. Like
Yeah.
that's really what's obvious.
Yeah.
One thing that really came out, and I'm going to try to paraphrase this, but what's evident is the position that talking about this, like the people who are in the know, who want to talk about this, they're going to have to wait for things to get declassified. Like that's really what they're going to have to wait for, because they're not just going to be able to come out and do this without getting into a lot of trouble. I think that's the bottom line. And me and you, and I'm sure most people watching this, want them just to break their security oath to say, the hell with it, we're just going to do it.
It's not realistic.
Well, it's not what they don't seem likely to do that.
Right.
Like that's the bottom line. Whatever we think, it's hard to force them into doing this. And so this is where it's at.
And would their one piece of information break everything open? I don't know that it would.
It's a good question.
So it wouldn't be worth the risk to any of them unless, they came out as a group or.
Well, I'll just say, I mean, in my own very ineffectual way, I have been trying to nudge some of these people in that direction. I'm like, you've got an opportunity here. This is, there's really extraordinary potential to push forward the conversation. For me to say something, for other researchers to say something, Stephen Greer or anyone else, like no one's really going to care, because until you have a major security classification and you've got what is considered authoritative by the official establishment, I mean, that's just the name of the game. Then no one else is really going to care. Like they'll care a little bit, but they're not going to care as much as if an insider with genuine clearances starts to talk. And the problem is that those people have the clearances and they've got the strictures on them where they don't feel that they can do it.
Right.
Having said that, I want to jump to Eric Davis here.
I think I remember, I was just smiling to myself because I think I remember one time not too long ago when you were asking Hal if he'd do an interview and he responded with exclamation marks.
Oh, did he? Yeah, that's right. That's right. He did.
He's like, what?
No, I don't think so. No, not right now. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm surprised he did the one with George Knapp, honestly. So let's move on to Eric Davis, who's a very close associate of Hal Puthoff. Davis, of course, is famous in his own right. He's an amazing individual, I think. Worked with Robert Bigelow for NIDS in the 90s, very much involved in the Skinwalker Ranch investigation, along with Colm Kelleher. He's deeply involved in that. And very much involved in cutting edge science and physics relating to everything to do with UFOs, everything, I think. So he did an interview less than a year ago with Alejandro Rojas of Open Minds. And you and I were just chatting with Alejandro, who's a very good friend of ours. And I'll just say, like, I agree with many things that Alejandro comes out with, and I disagree with some others. And this is going to come up here in this conversation with Eric Davis. So it's a great interview that Alejandro did with Eric Davis. And at one point, Eric Davis says this: we do know one thing. They're here. They're doing something. We don't know their origin because they don't want to communicate with us. That's interesting. But it gets even more so. I went the wrong way there. He goes on. Now, Alejandro prefaced, he says, what about crashes? And Alejandro said, I'm very skeptical of stories of crashes and UFO crash retrievals. This is where I would disagree with him. I'm a very strong proponent in the reality of UFO crash retrievals. But anyway, Alejandro just says, I'm skeptical of it. And Eric Davis says, no, there have been crashes. And he says, even though these things behave like a conscious, spiritual, psychic entity, they do have advanced technology. They have hardware, and there are craft, and there's occupants. This is just from not even a year ago. This is 1 month before the whole Wilson document leaked out, which of course put Eric Davis at the center of that whole thing. Oops, I keep going the wrong way here in this, sorry. He goes on, he just says, this is a very super sensitive topic because it's something that your listeners, he says, you're probably going to be shocked at, probably less than 1/1000th or 1/100,000th of the United States military and the government overall doesn't even know about it. I think he meant to say knows about it, but he's in an interview here. So that's quite fascinating. Where you've got, now again, Davis is not a member of TTSA, but I consider him an honorary member for sure. He's very close to Puthoff.
Mhm.
He knows all the people in it very, very well. I know he knows the next person we're going to talk about, Luis Elizondo, quite well. So I consider him part of this group, and which is why we've included him here. So let's move on to Lou Elizondo.
And he makes very explicit statements.
It's astonishing. I mean, I'm very grateful for the fact that Eric Davis has said the things that he has. Like we're fortunate to have someone in his position, of his caliber, willing to say the things that he has said. So if he's ever watches this and he's wondering, why is Dolan talking about this? I just want you to know, Eric Davis, I'm personally very grateful and appreciate the statements that you have made. So let's move on to Luis Elizondo, who, of course, was head of the ATIP program at the Pentagon. This was disputed all this time. McMillan's article finally, I guess you could say, helps to clear it. Although I think it's been known all along that Lou Elizondo was indeed part of ATIP. And now he's part of TTSA. And this is from a lecture he gave just about a year ago, March 15, 2019, for the Scientific Coalition for Ufology's Anomalous Aerospace Phenomena Conference. That's a mouthful. So he's speaking
Anomalous.
there. Yeah.
Funny.
So this lecture's on YouTube. I would encourage people to go check it out. He just says, there's a lot of things actually, but one thing here is there are some materials that are absolutely special and have been briefed to some very, very senior levels of this government, and they do remarkable and extraordinary things, and they're built in such a way that to this day, we still can't replicate them to this day. So that's March of 2019. That's a very strong statement about the metamaterial, of course. And then 2 months later, he's on Tucker Carlson on Fox. This is in the build up to the TV show Unidentified for the History Channel that features him and members of the TTSA. So in my opinion, this is the key UFO related interview of the year 2019, 5 minutes on Carlson. And as they're wrapping up, Tucker Carlson, I'm just going to read this. He says, do you believe, based on your decade of serving in the U.S. government on this question, that the U.S. government has in its possession any material from one of these, and he says aircraft, but he's talking about UFOs. Elizondo pauses. He says, I do, yes. And then Tucker Carlson paused. This is, again, anyone can watch this. So he's restating, he says, you think the U.S. government has debris from a UFO in his possession right now? And Elizondo almost backs off. He says, well, unfortunately, Tucker, I really have to be careful of my NDA, my non-disclosure agreement. I really can't go into a lot more detail than that. And Carlson was ready to back away himself. He says, okay. But then just before they ended the interview, Elizondo says, but simply put, yes. Simply put, yes. And again, that's one of those wow moments. Just imagine any time in the last 5 years ago, if that type of statement had been made on a national network. No way. No way. Wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, it's everywhere now.
So you really have now, all right, people have been trying to trash the credibility of Lou Elizondo, but he's still standing. He is still standing. And he's standing very tall and very strong, in my opinion.
Especially now.
Now, here's an interesting aftermath to that. A friend and research colleague of mine, James Ian Dolan, I hope James is listening, shout out. He has a YouTube channel called Engaging the Phenomenon. Go check it out sometime. He was in touch with Eric Davis. He was able to communicate with Eric Davis. And immediately after that interview on Fox, he asks Eric Davis to comment on that. And Indoli got this very, very carefully worded statement. I say carefully worded because, according to James, this was written and then rewritten a couple of times. So it was very, very carefully worded. And what Eric Davis wrote was this. This is on June 1st, 2019. Early morning of, I believe. Luis Elizondo's very brief answer to Tucker Carlson's question about whether the U.S. government is in possession of recovered, crashed and landed UFO technology hardware is 1,000% accurate. My national security NDAs prevent me from adding any further comment on this. And I want to thank James for getting that statement and then putting it out there for the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
So just another of those wow moments. There's only a couple of other statements here that I want to bring up. Can I just keep going, or do you want to jump in?
Yeah, let's do it.
So this is Tom DeLonge, and it would be really unfair not to mention Tom DeLonge of Blink 182. He's been deeply involved in this as well. And the thing about him is he's clearly, first of all, he knows all these people involved. He's had deep conversations with all of the individuals involved, obviously. And this is another interview he did with George Knapp from just last October, not that long ago. He says, I was told there were crashes, that is UFO crashes. And we took that, probably got pretty freaked out, pretty scared. We scurried it away, created what they call a pickup game of counterintelligence to keep people away from asking hard questions that we didn't know the answers to. And we created this crash program, much bigger than the Manhattan Project, much bigger than Apollo, to figure out how this stuff worked and how to build our own defense system against it, should there be more. So again, people can argue, is this absolutely true, or is this not true? But one thing to keep in mind is simply that this core group of people, TTSA, like the whole idea of crash retrieval of UFO, it's second nature to them. Mm-hmm. Like, it's very obvious. Mm-hmm. It's very obvious when you see the sum total of all of this, that they take this as a given. Mm-hmm. And it's not simply, I think it would be unjust to say that they believe that there's crash retrievals. These people are in a very good position to know.
Right.
And you can see that they haven't made a unified statement as an organization.
Right. Do you think they will?
I would like for them to, and I'm sure some of them will listen to this. And I have a feeling this is an unwelcome suggestion coming from me, coming from us, but I'm going to really try to make the case for you guys there, that this is a really good thing for you to do, that this is the next true step to take. You have taken the UFO conversation a long way from a very far distant place in our culture to a much more prominent place. And I am personally grateful for that. But I really think, like, these guys are sitting on information that really can take us much farther. Mm-hmm. And I would like to see that. Mm-hmm. Whether it will happen or not is a whole other question. I'm actually doubtful that they're going to want to do it. But here's the other thing. The information just keeps coming out bit by bit by bit.
That's right.
And
a lot of it due to them, of course.
They started a lot of this.
They didn't just start it. They saw a lot of this through. Like, so many things are because of them. When we did our 2019, all these influential stories,
right?
Most of those were because of TTSA.
That's exactly right. So they deserve that credit. But the thing is, I'm not sure that this subject is now, I think that the subject is bigger and has its own momentum that they are also not going to be able to manage 100%. Like, I think it's got momentum independent of them to a certain extent. And yes, I think it would be a very good thing for them to come out formally on the idea of legitimate crash retrievals of UFOs. Can they prove it to the satisfaction of every hardened skeptic out there? Maybe they can, maybe they can't. They're going to need declassification, I think, to help them along. Well, that would be very nice. So I've got one more statement here, and this is not from a TTSA member, but it's from someone I feel is definitely an honorary member. That's Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell's made many statements when he was alive about the reality of crash UFOs and the acquisition of tech and bodies. I'll just read this one from February of 2004. This was it was quoted in a local newspaper at the time. He had given a lecture and he just said, "A few insiders know the truth and are studying the bodies that have been discovered." So you got a moon walking Apollo astronaut in 2004, PhD, making that statement. And even, back then the media just let that go as if ho-hum, who cares? There's our crazy uncle at the family reunion type thing. That's, I think, how they treated him. And it was ridiculous that they would do so. I'll just state that in that very year, in 2004, I met Edgar Mitchell face to face for the first time. So we had corresponded before then, but I had not met him until we were both in Roswell, New Mexico in July, July of 2004. And it was nice to meet him. We had a nice conversation, and we actually went into a closed room alone for, about 5 minutes. And it was there that he told me, I wish I had written this down explicitly, but I'll just tell you that he said to me that it had been known to him from two specific sources, prominent sources within the defense community, that not just that UFOs are real, but that at deeply classified levels, we had scientists who had in their possession alien tech and bodies, plural, multiple bodies. And he made that statement to me. And as time went by, you could see that he started not to say that. And he would make other statements instead. Like he started saying in his more later years that, well, I grew up in the Roswell area and had a lot of people there. And after I became a famous astronaut, they started giving me stories about Roswell. But then he stopped talking about. But the thing was, I think it's because matters came to a head. Even in 2006, when I became aware of the Wilson document, and I've said this many times, I'll keep saying as long as I need to, I was shown a couple of pages of that document, the key pages, like where Davis transcribes Wilson's statement that this technology was not made by human hands, not of this world, not made by man. Like I read that in 2006, all right? So as that whole thing fleshed out to me, and especially after Stephen Greer wrote his book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, where he outed his meeting with Wilson, like I was able to put two and two together. Oh, that's Wilson. And I wrote to a number of people who were close to the scene. One of them was Edgar Mitchell. And as I've talked about this many times, I phoned Admiral Wilson himself, and once he realized what I was talking about, he angrily hung up the phone. But Edgar Mitchell, I think matters came to a head for him around that time, because I was almost begging Edgar Mitchell to throw me a bone. I said, look, I know you support the work that I'm doing, and this happened. I know this happened. So what else can you give me? And he wouldn't do it. He actually said the people who've come to me with this classified information about alien tech and bodies, he said, did so at great risk to their professions, professionally, personally, and risk to their families, he said to me. And he said, until the situation changes, I can't give you any more. And it seems to me after that, he started talking much less about alien tech and alien bodies. I think he just decided to walk back from that.
Can we mention the little promo video that we just saw that would be great for people to see? It really speaks to what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've got it on your screen there.
Yeah, this is by Project Unity. We saw this a while ago. And you can look up on YouTube the UFO leak of the century. And
Reading Room promo, it's called.
It's only 7.5 minutes long. And it really speaks to exactly that.
I like it, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing where they go with it. It's about the Wilson document, and there's clips from Edgar Mitchell talking. Like in retrospect, you can see he's clearly talking about this on television. There's clips of
Stephen. You can see how uncomfortable he is, but you can see how these guys put this all together.
Stephen Greer's in there.
Kudos to them.
And then they actually have my voiceover at the very end, I noticed. So, no, it looks interesting, and I'll definitely be interested to see how that turns out. So that's really what we had on TTSA. I think when you look at the nexus of people, and there's other people close to TTSA who have made also, I think, very interesting statements. I've talked about Dr. Kit Green in the past. There's Jacques Vallée, who hasn't really explicitly, openly talked about crash retrievals, but he's kind of sort of a little bit danced around it. So you really see that there's this core group of individuals. They clearly know that something's going on here. They're saying what they can say, and they're definitely not saying what they feel they cannot say. But they're dropping enough little droplets out there for the rest of us. So I think, I call it an open secret that's no longer a secret. Like I think it's out there, and I think they need to recognize that they've actually outed themselves. Like, I'm not outing them. No one else has outed them. They did it themselves. And that's kudos for them, by the way. That's not a criticism. That's commending them. And now I think the logical thing to do is take it to the next level. And let's move the conversation to the next level. Because honestly, it's one thing to say, yeah, there's something out there. We don't know what they are. Maybe it's the Russians. Maybe it's the Chinese. No one believes that. Everyone knows that's a fiction. We understand why you make it a fiction, but nonetheless, it is pretend. And the reality is, and we know that there have been crash retrievals of these objects. They're not from here. Maybe they're from another planet. Maybe they're from this world in another dimension. That seems to be Eric Davis's opinion from what you can gather in his interview with Alejandro. Whatever the answer is, they're not from here. They're not us. And we've got their stuff. We've got some of their technology, and we absolutely need to move this conversation forward publicly so that we have a mature, intelligent discussion on crash retrievals of exotic UAP/UFOs. That's it. That's it.
Great.
What else we got?
Okay, so I think we're gonna
wrap this up.
We're gonna wrap this up.
We were gonna make this 30 minutes, and we went a little longer.
Yeah.
We knew that.
So just want to say hi to the chat family. You guys are always here.
Good to see you guys out here.
Good to see you all. And just a couple of things. The next event that we're going to be at is in Seattle. We are both speaking. Yes. And if you want to look that up and see what that's all about, because that's not a UFO conference. It is anpconference.com. Stands for Architects of the New Paradigm. So anpconference.com.
It's not a UFO conference, but it's very interesting. It's all about creativity. It's called Mind Gaming. Tracey's speaking there. I'm speaking there. And honestly, I think it's a good opportunity for both of us to talk about something different for a change. And I'm looking forward to it.
It's something that we're kind of really naturally into. So
yeah.
I think
for me, it's about being creative, about being independent, and in a world that increasingly is threatening to take a lot of that independence away from us. And you've got, a little bit of remote viewing.
Tell you,
maybe.
Yeah, obviously there's a little bit of remote viewing, and my background was, some of you know, some of you don't, was an artist in a video game company. So I've always been on the creative side of things, and this is about creativity and innovation. So I have a lot of ideas that I pulled together from all of my different backgrounds, that's one of my favorite things. I'm really high in ideation, and that's my realm.
Good. So that's in 2 months. That's anpconference.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
What else we have here?
Well, the only other thing is, I guess some of you are going to be watching Project Blue Book tonight. I think that I think it's at episode 5.
Right.
And just want to say, Richard is doing what he did last year, where he explains the different cases of Blue Book. So on the weekends, last weekend it ended up being on a Sunday, but typically on Saturdays, Richard will go through and do the cases one at a time. So I think the one coming up, you just did episode
I'm a couple of weeks. I'm a little bit behind.
And you're going to be doing episode 4, I think, this weekend, which will be Hopkinsville.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. This
last week we did Area 51. I like doing that show, actually. I like doing the themes, I guess I should say. Because I love going into the historical cases. They do a lot of the history, of course. And although I think it's valuable to bring in interested people who don't know a lot about UFOs and to get them engaged in the subject. It's obviously, for me, it's very important for people to know the genuine history behind those cases. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have, family that's watching it that was never into this before. They're really into the story, but they're very curious of what is real and what isn't.
Right.
So it's nice that there's somewhere where that's being explained.
Well,
so,
try, in a short podcast. So.
But anyhow, hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everyone.
Day for some of you, depending where you are. Sleep.
Hey, if you like what you see here, please smash the like button. Definitely helps us out. If you do not subscribe to our channel, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You get notifications. I hear sometimes they come in late, sometimes they don't come in. We cannot control that. YouTube is buggy. We all know that, but please do subscribe to our channel. Definitely helps us out. If you're really interested in what we're up to, come to our website. Come to richarddolanmembers.com. There's a paywall, but there's also a lot of free stuff, and you can go check out what you like. I've also got Richard Dolan Press, which has information on the books that I write and publish by other authors. So that's always available too. That's it. That's it.
All right, everyone.
Everyone have a great night. Glad to have you out here. We'll catch you next time.
Take care.